Hello my friends and welcome back. Thank you very much for being with me again today. A little summary of what's going on in Ukraine provided by the Ukrainian media. So they will tell us what they did, what the Russians did on the entire front. Remember, this cut the interpretations of this article, just get the information, even though the information, can be not only by interpretation, by the way you expose it, what kind of semantics you use over there, you figure out, or maybe you don't, what the intent is. This article comes from Ukrainska Pravda from December 9th, 2022. This is the title. Ukraine's armed forces target 8 command posts and 11 clusters of Russian troops, General Staff report. In the course of the last 24 hours, the armed forces of Ukraine have repelled attacks and struck Russian command posts and clusters of troops. Over the past day, Defense Forces units have repelled Russian invaders' attacks near the settlements of Bilohorivka in Luhansk Oblast and Kilshchivka and Marinka in Donetsk Oblast. At the same time, the Russians launched 5 missile attacks and 3 airstrikes, as well as 54 attacks from multiple launch rocket systems. Now it's gonna go and list each and every front and see what the developments are over there. On the Severoshchnya front, Russian forces carried out mortar attacks on the settlements of Kodine, Sosnivka, Kidrativka and Zapsilia in Sumy Oblast. On the Slobozhanshchnya front, Russian forces deployed mortars and artillery to fire on areas around Strilecha, Ternova and Kupiansk in Kharkiv Oblast. On the Kupiansk front, the Russians are on the defensive. Okay, so let's remember that. So in Kupiansk, supposedly the Ukrainians are advancing. The Russians are on the defensive. Russian troops fired on the areas in and around the settlements of Sinkivka, Pishchanie and Pershotravneve in Kharkiv Oblast, as well as 2 settlements in Luhansk Oblast from tanks and a wide range of artillery. Well, from previous articles, I identified that whenever the Russians are using tanks or the Ukrainians are mentioning tanks in Russian, artillery or shelling, this and that, usually, I would say that 9 out of 10, that is where the Russians are advancing, or at least that's a Russian offensive. On the Liman front, the Russians carried out artillery attacks in the areas of Khrekivka, Makivka, and 2 more in Luhansk Oblast, as well as Torske and Kryhorivka in Donetsk Oblast. Now, Liman used to be a Russian offensive, nothing anymore. Now we go to the 2 others that were Russian offensives, and that was Bakhmut and Avdiivka fronts. So on the Bakhmut and Avdiivka front, the Russians are continuing their attempts to launch an offensive. Now, this coming from the Ukrainians, probably the Russians are way ahead in their offensive because, as you know, you minimize your enemy's achievements and you maximize yours. You minimize your losses and maximize their losses. So they deployed tanks, so in Bakhmut and Avdiivka, deployed tanks, mortars and cannon and rocket artillery to attack the area of 25 settlements. Among them are Bardych, Avdiivka, Soledar, Bakhmut, and some other ones. About, as I said, 25 here in Donetsk Oblast. Now, Russian troops are on the defensive on the Novopavlivka front. Novopavlivka was again an operation where the Ukrainians were backing up, and the Russians were in an offensive. So it was at one point Liman, let's put it this way, Bakhmut and Avdiivka were always on offensive, always, in about a month and a half or so. Liman and Novopavlivka fronts were on and off. Sometimes there were the Russians in the offensive, sometimes there were nothing, just on and off. Now we go and find out that the Russians are in a defensive as well in Novopavlivka front, where they used to be in an offensive operation. Russian troops are on a defensive on the Novopavlivka front. Vuhledar and about 5 more settlements in Donetsk Oblast suffered from shelling. On the Zaporozhia front, the Russians deployed tanks and artillery in shelling the areas of 14 settlements. In particular, these were Vremivka, Velika, Novosivka, and like 5 more in Donetsk Oblast, and Dorozhnyanka and others in Zaporozhia Oblast. On the Kherson front, Russian forces are conducting defensive operations. Again, defensive operation. Tank in defensive operation. They don't sound right here, but anyway, right? Tank and artillery shelling were recorded in the areas of Berislav, Kozatskie, and about 3 more in the Kherson region and the outskirts of the city of Kherson. The Russians continue to suffer casualties. On 7 December this year, Russian forces sustained about 240 casualties as a result of Ukrainian attacks on the areas where the occupying forces were concentrated near the cities of Berdyansk, Tokmak, Melitopol, and Enerhodar, and like 5 more Zaporozhia Oblast. 3 ammunition storage points and about 20 units of military equipment of various types were destroyed. The hospital deployed on the premises of the Tokmak anti-tuberculosis dispensary is completely filled with wounded servicemen from the Russian occupation forces. Units of Ukraine's rocket forces and artillery struck 8 command posts, 11 clusters of personnel, weapons and military equipment, and 2 ammunition storage points belonging to the invaders over the past day. Alright, so here we have a little summary of what's going on the front, on the whole entire front. So the Russians are on the offensive on 2, and I think on the defensive on 2. 2-2. So the score is 2-2, and everything else is back and forth. Well, this, as I said, comes from the Ukrainian sources. Thank you very much for being with me again today. Stay strong, stay smart, look for the truth, and be just.